The X-Men universe has introduced us to a whole bunch of characters with mutant abilities over the years, but it's also provided characters without mutant abilities, both as heroes and villains. There are so many characters who are fan favorites, yet who are not born this way. Instead, they came upon their powers in other ways. The X-Men universe gave us inclusivity, and in today's video, we'll talk about 15 characters who left a lasting impression on us fans, just like our favorite mutes. So grab some snacks and let's get down to business. But before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Juggernaut. We're starting off this list strong, guys. Even though he's portrayed as this ruthless and chaotic villain, Juggernaut was not actually born this way. This behemoth of a man, who has literally startled me countless times when he has shown up unexpectedly in the comics, is actually the human stepbrother of Charles Xavier. Growing up, Cain Marko had great resentment for his brother. After all, Charles was always excelling in school, be it in academics or sports. This led to Cain's father often beating him up in an alcohol-induced rage, and this beating turned the sibling rivalry into hatred in no time, and gave Cain a severe inferiority complex. Very biblical with the Cain and Abel dynamic, if you ask me. So when the time was right, instead of pursuing academia like Charles, Cain joined the military, hoping to get recognition there. While he was serving in the US Army, he came across the temple of Cyttorak. Who is Cyttorak, you ask? Well, this extra-dimensional being was a deity for people on Earth back in the day. He is the embodiment of chaos and destruction, which led him to being often referred to as the Destroyer. When Cain stumbled across the ancient temple, he came in contact with this magical object known as the Crimson Gem. This gem was powered by Cyttorak himself, promising his human avatar earth-shattering powers. Of course, Cain accepted those powers, and boom! Now we have our favorite mutant villain, Juggernaut. Now, given the long-drawn history with the mutant superheroes and their leader, Professor X, you'd think Juggernaut would be considered mutant enough to join them in Krakoa, the safe haven for mutants. However, as his powers are magical in nature and not genetic like the rest of the mutants, he is not allowed there. Don't worry, Juggernaut, you might not get the place in Krakoa, but you definitely earned a spot on our list. That counts for something, right?
All the dinosaurs feared the T-Rex.
Deadpool, our favorite witty and sarcastic anti-hero, has had quite a few run-ins with our mutant superheroes. Now, Wade Wilson has abilities that are quite powerful, and one can often mistake him for being a mutant, but that's not quite the case. Despite all his attempts to be buddy-buddy with the mutant heroes, hoping they will someday let him join the X-Men team, he simply does not have what it takes to join the group. Sorry, Wade, but that's just the truth. Wade was not born gifted like the rest of the group. When he was older, he was experimented upon during his time at the Weapon X program, and this led to him developing powers to heal from pretty much everything that was thrown his way. Sure, he has regenerative cells, which make his healing factor far superior to most people, kind of like Wolverine's, but despite that, he is not a mutant. He is a person whose body was mutated due to an outer force, making him a mutate. X-Men has always focused on keeping the mutant kind safe, seeking to be put on equal footing with the humans. They've also done a great job at comforting people who feel alienated. However, there comes a level of discipline and prejudice associated with this role. That's why there is not much room to allow a mutate to join the ranks of X-Men. Even though Charles overthrew the government of Genosha to ensure that the mutate on that island was not oppressed, but still, a spot on the X-Men team was not something that he managed to get for a while. Eventually, in Deadpool issue 16, we get to see the regenerating degenerate finally get his most yearned spot after he walks into Utopia and asks for a place on the team. Logan persuaded Cyclops enough to give the Merc a chance to rank alongside his fellows. So good on you, Wade. I hope the constant flipping of the morals and fingers and rampant display of maddening vigilantism doesn't get in the way of your X-Men career. Lady Deathstrike. I'm not saying that it was not cool to see a female villain version of Wolverine, because it absolutely was. However, Yuriko Oyama, despite how she was being portrayed in the movie, is not a mutant. She is actually a cyborg. She is the daughter of Lord Darkwind, the Japanese kingpin who was absolutely obsessed with adamantium. He was actually the one who invented the process of coating bones with adamantium, but he managed to do this because he let go of his humanity and dove into his work. He was a cruel and abusive man. He tortured Yuriko and her brothers when they were kids and eventually killed off her siblings. Not only that, he also tortured her lover Kira at one point. Not cool, Kenji Oyama. This led Yuriko to hate her father, and when she got the chance, she killed Lord Darkwind with her own hands. She was finally free from her evil father, but right after this, Kira committed suicide because she simply could not deal with the death of Kenji, which is messed up. This in turn messed up Yuriko as well. She decided to carry forward her father's work and took the reins in her hands. Bullseye, the villain from the Daredevil series, was actually given adamantium plates by Kenji Oyama, which the villain never paid for. Yuriko decided to get the payment and started tracking him. This led her to finding out about Wolverine, who was forced to go through the process by William Stryker. Now, William Stryker's wife used to tutor Yuriko when she was a kid, so we, as fans, know that the Strykers were the ones who stole Oyama's work several years ago. Yuriko, however, didn't know that Stryker had done so. She assumed that Wolverine had the methods himself, so she decided she was going to hunt him down for the adamantium skeleton. To succeed in her plight, after being defeated initially by Heather Hudson, Wolverine's longtime friend, Yuriko met up with Spiral. Spiral turned Yuriko into a cyborg and gave her the adamantium claws to rival Wolverine's. This is how our Lady Deathstrike came to be. Sad, isn't it?
Don't fight it. You can't.
Mr. Sinister. Mr. Sinister, the one who caused a lot of unnecessary drama in the series, is actually not a mutant, even though he does have mutant DNA. Let me explain. So, the Mr. Sinister we all know is actually one of the 3 clones that Nathaniel Essex made of himself. The other 2 clones are Dr. Stasis and Orbis Stellaris. Now, Nathaniel Essex was transformed by the mutant villain we know as Apocalypse. Nathaniel was obsessed with natural evolution and how the mutants eventually came to be. Nathaniel subsequently died, and his work was carried forward by his 3 clones and a clone of his late wife, Rebecca, known as Mother Righteous. The Mr. Sinister clone eventually became a renowned geneticist and was extremely good at cloning and manipulation of mutant DNA. Thanks to the latter, Mr. Sinister was able to give himself mutant DNA. Now, why did the man do such a thing? Well, Mr. Sinister was working his best to escape the apocalypse. This led to him creating Madeline Pryor and the birth of Nathan Summers, who he thought would eventually end the apocalypse. Even though he wasn't born with mutant DNA, he was given a seat in the Krakoan Council because of his life's work. In fact, Mr. Sinister's work acted as a crucial resource for Krakoan resolution protocols. Omega Sentinel. Born as Karima Shapandar, the Omega Sentinel was a human like the rest of us, but she was infected with the Omega Sentinel technology, which turned her into a killing machine. She was the first to be the Bio Sentinel, where a human body can be converted with cybernetic tech and turned into a walking sentinel, with the prime directive of hunting and killing mutants. Eventually, Charles Xavier and Magneto helped her overcome her programming. Once she turned in a better leaf, she joined the X-Men team and used her powers to help mutant kind. However, as she was associated with the X-Men and was mostly fully computerized, she was a target for many to corrupt. Marauder Malice and Archaea, the primal villain, managed to corrupt her system and bring her back to the Prime Directive. At the time of this, Omega Sentinel was able to fight the virus and help the X-Men, but eventually she succumbed to the virus and her programming was reset. A version of herself came from the future and killed her, as this future version lived on in an alternate timeline where mutants dominated over machines. So with Karima's death in the hands of a complete machine version of herself, a new era started for the mutant kind of Earth 616, and it was not pretty.
Sooner or later, they will meet the twins.
Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch. When first introduced in the Marvel Universe, the Maximoff twins were said to be the kids of Magneto, the mutant with the ability to control metals. However, this origin story has been retconned quite a few times. In the Uncanny Avengers issue 4, we learn that the Maximoff twins are the children of Moira and Django Maximoff, both of whom happen to be humans. Then how did they get their powers? Well, the High Evolutionary took the twins and did genetic experiments on them, giving them powers as a result of it, and then returned them to their parents, claiming that they manifested their mutant powers as one does. Wanda was always treated more as a sorceress than as a mutant in the comics. Yet, it was shocking news when, in the 2014 event known as Axis, we saw Wanda curse her bloodline when Magneto and Quicksilver were fighting, but only Pietro was affected. With such a foolproof paternity test, we all had to accept that Magneto was indeed not the father. With so many retcons, it gets hard to keep a tally of who is a mutant and who is not. But given the most recent one, we have to say that all of us, including the twins, were bamboozled into believing they were mutants. Moira McTaggart, the brilliant geneticist and Nobel laureate leading the Mutant Research Center on Muir Island, has always been an ally of mutant kind. She never had any extraordinary talents other than her sheer willpower and knowledge. More often than not, Moira and Charles were the brains of the operation. She had worked closely with the mutant superheroes for years, and she was even the only human to contract the legacy virus. As fans, how can you not love the ally who is willing to put her life on the line for our heroes? Ever since her introduction in the 96th issue of X-Men back in 1975, Moira has always been known as a human. But this was retconned yet again by Jonathan Hickman in House of X and Power of X in 2019. In his 2 comic book series, Jonathan gave us the most diabolical retcon ever. Turns out, Moira was a mutant all this time. She has the power of reincarnation, and she's gone through the whole X-Men cycle 10 times already. If you want to know more about that, check out our video. But in short, Moira had lived through various lives after her powers manifested when she was 13 and got a mysterious fever. After she died the first time, Moira realized that she too could be a mutant and decided to explore the mutant genomes to the fullest. At first, she thought the mutants were a disease and needed a cure. However, Mystique and Destiny showed up to explain to Moira that if she continued to betray her species, it would not end well for her. After being slowly burnt to a crisp, Moira spent the next few lives of hers trying to figure out how to help the mutes. She tried out various methods, which we won't get into, and eventually she became the friends of Charles and Magneto, hoping to help mutants triumph over the machines. Despite this plot twist and her current status as a mutant, we wanted to show her some love and give her this position on the list. Longshot. Cozy in, boys. Time for a story. In a dimension far away from Earth, there was a world known as Mojo World. There, these beings called the Spineless Ones ruled the area. However, a temporal loop was created and they were driven mad. In their rampant madness, the Spineless Ones ordered a bunch of humanoid slaves to serve them. The creators of these slaves, Ares, didn't like seeing the slaves being oppressed and decided to give them enhanced abilities. When Shatterstar was sent back to the Mojoverse, he was taken in by Ares, who experimented on Shatterstar and used his DNA to make a hero known as Longshot. The Longshot guy, even though born from mutant DNA, is not actually a mutant. He simply has enhanced agility thanks to Ares and was born with a lot of luck on his side. Longshot was expected to be a slave, and when he was about to get his memory wiped, he managed to find a portal to Earth where he escaped to. Once on Earth, he became friends with Doctor Strange and Ricochet Rita, who helped him thwart Mojo, the ruler of Mojoland. Eventually, he got a spot on the X-Men team and became a hero. Now, here's the crazy part. He fell in love with Dazzler, who we all know is the mother of Shatterstar. So, in a way, Shatterstar's father is actually his son because Longshot was born from Shatterstar's DNA. Talk about a complicated family situation. Putting all that aside, despite his position on the mutant team, Longshot is definitely not a mutant, not by a long shot indeed. Spiral. Remember Ricochet Rita? Well, after she helped Longshot, the Bile Mojo transformed her into the six-armed sorceress we know as Spiral. She was trapped in this cruel time loop where she would always help Longshot and end up becoming the hideous Spiral despite all of her wishes. This sick time loop led to Spiral harboring a deep hatred for Longshot, so she manipulated whatever she could to harm him and his allies, the X-Men. Eventually, when Mojo was tired of her, she was freed from this time loop, giving her free access to go and mess up the X-Men. Her powers, bestowed on her by Mojo himself, were diminished after this banishment, and she had to become a drug dealer in Los Angeles. Eventually, Spiral made it to the ranks of X-Force after she befriended Ginny, an orphan girl. She was doing so well in life, but ultimately, she decided she wanted to go back to the Mojo world again. As Mojo was not there at this time, Spiral was free to do whatever she pleased and decided to make her very own broadcast show known as Spiral's Showcase. In case you're wondering, yes, she's the one who turned Lady Deathstrike into the cybernetic killing machine. Lockheed. Lockheed, the purple-winged alien, is very reminiscent of small aliens. He is surely not a mutant, as that's what his species simply happens to be. Then how did he manage to be part of the X-Men? Well, at one point, Kitty was abducted by the Brood. Lockheed was the one to save her, and by doing so, he formed a bond with a mutant, which led to him traveling all the way from Sleaze World to Earth to help with the mutant cause. He followed Kitty wherever she went. He helped her when she was with the British superhero Team Excalibur. While he was assassinated at one point, he was brought back to life by Megan and Rachel Summers. His bond with Kitty was genuinely such a cute thing to watch. When Pete Wisdom became Kitty's boyfriend, Lockheed would often play pranks on him, but that doesn't mean he could not get serious. He eventually joined the Planetary Defense Force known as the Sword to protect his homeworld. He was present when Kitty sacrificed herself to save the Earth and when the heroes had to fight off the Brood in space. Eventually, Lockheed got a better job as the hall monitor at Jean Grey School for Higher Learning. If you're wondering whether Lockheed went with Kitty to Krakoa, well, I have good news for you. He did. When Kitty was killed, Lockheed actually confronted Sebastian Shaw to get the answers and the closure from him. Lockheed is the best boy in the whole wide world, and there's no doubt about that. Fantomex. The mutant man of mystery, the Fantomex of Charlie Cluster 7, whichever name you know him by, happens to be a highly evolved and advanced being. He was created by the Weapon Plus program, a program devoted to creating super soldiers. This whole program was based on Project Rebirth, which gave us Captain America. But unlike Captain America, the weapons that the Weapon Plus project now created were all straight up evil. See, a facility was created in rural England known as the Whirl. In the World, a team of super soldiers, known as Super Sentinels, were to be designed and implemented. Here, a human mother was made to mate with a machine to create these super soldier babies. This was actually an orchestrated public stunt to make the genocide of mutants palatable to the public. Charlie was the next generation of these Super Sentinels. He was the Weapon 13 on the Weapon Plus project. Out of all the weapons created, Fantomex was the strongest and came out on top. He was cunning and skilled in misdirection. Not only that, he had an inbuilt chip in his nervous system. Yes, if that sounds confusing, this so-called chip is an external nervous system manifested as a techno-organic flying ship. Originally, when he was created, he was made of 3 brains with an automated nervous system. With one of his brains in charge, Fantomex took on the name of Jean-Philippe Charles because of his love for French culture. Owing to the nature of his birth and physiological composition, it was only a matter of time before Fantomex joined the mutant cause. He joined the X-Men group and he cycled through Magneto's team and Cable's team over time. Finally, the one team where he found the spot that he was looking for happened to be the darker version of the X-Men, that is, X-Force. With 2 guns blazing, more often than not, Fantomex ended up on the anti-hero side of the spectrum. At one point, his body was dumped into a cloning facility. Given that all 3 of his brains were intact, the machine made a body for each brain. One was Cluster, the female. One was Le Fantomex, the one we know and love. And lastly, we got Dark Fantomex, the most evil and cruel version of the 3. Warbird. Warbirds were elite Shi'ar warriors who were meant to protect the ruling family. Avadara Naganandini was born in one of the breed art warehouses in the Flesh Bazaar district of Chandalar. She was the result of a mating between an automated seed sprinkler and one of the 1,000 frozen eggs that were taken from the female factory workers as a body tax. Warbird's birth mother was actually an alien slave who was brought from a faraway planet which was conquered by the Shi'ar. Her body was absolutely not meant to give birth to the Shi'ar, and she passed away during childbirth. Avadar grew up in the war factory, as one can expect. There, she learned how to assemble a pulse cannon before she even started talking. Despite that, Avadar was a child, and she enjoyed drawing as most kids do. However, as she grew up, she thought that the ways of her behavior were not aligned with the Shi'ar people, and so she burnt the drawings. She moved on to her academy life, and there she earned the Warbird title. Despite the title, she couldn't give up her empathy for the Shi'ar. When she failed to kill a child, her punishment was to escort Kid Gladiator as his personal bodyguard. As Kid Gladiator had destroyed about half of the royal city on Chandalar, he was banished to Earth as a punishment, and off Avadara went with him. This led to her eventually running into the X-Men, thanks to the Jean Grey School of Higher Learning. When the school was attacked by Krakoa, Avadara defended the school, and well, that was more than enough reason for her to be considered an ally.
Leave him alone!
And he's gone.
Cloak and Dagger. Even though we first meet Cloak and Dagger in the Spider-Man comics, there's no denying that these two characters were quite the pivotal part of the X-Men universe. But who are they? Well, let's talk about them. Tandy Bowen and Tyrone were two runaway kids. Tyrone had a chronic stutter, which unintentionally led to the death of his friend, Billy. Not being able to deal with the guilt of having his friend killed by the police, Tyrone was planning on running away to New York City. Tandy, on the other hand, was running away because the only person who made her feel loved, Rob Daltrey, had left for college. She was following him, and she wanted to go to New York City too. When Tandy was at the Manhattan Port Authority bus terminal, a man came up to her and tried to rob her. However, Tyrone was there, and he tackled the man and saved Tandy, even though he himself was hoping to rob her for the cash she had on her. But now that Tyrone had saved Tandy, an unlikely friendship was formed between the two. While the two teens were figuring out their next move, a man showed up, promising them food and shelter. Tandy, being the naive girl that she was, went with them with no worry about her safety, and Tyrone, in good faith, couldn't let her go alone. He felt like there was something shady about these people, so he went with Tandy to protect her just in case. Well, turns out he was right. Dr. Simon Marshall, this evil scientist, had his men round up some runaways by luring them in with food and shelter when the doctor really wanted to test his new drug on them. The two teens were knocked out prompt and pumped full of this designer drug. Thanks to some sort of latent genetic factors that never manifested and the magical interference of despair, the teens managed to survive. They escaped by jumping into the river, and then, at the worst time possible, their new powers manifested. Tyrone could feel a sort of darkness radiating from him that was strong enough to engulf anything and anyone around him. And only when Tandy, who was glowing super bright by the way, was around him would he feel normal. When Marshall's men attacked them, Tandy saw that she could throw bright light daggers at the people, while Tyrone discovered he could simply engulf the men in his darkness. This led to the duo becoming a crime-fighting super team named Cloak and Dagger, doing their best to protect other teenagers from the dangers they experience. Although Spider-Man initially saw them as misguided teens, eventually they became friends and joined hands to stop carnage. At one point, when Cloak and Dagger were working in Colombia to destroy the drug plantation, they met Emma Frost and Namor. This started the duo's interactions with our mutant superheroes. Mimic. Calvin Rankin is an on-again, off-again hero on the X-Men team. He was initially not a part of the team, but when he did become one, he was appointed as the deputy leader of the team. See, Calvin was not born a mutant. He was the son of a scientist who was working on several dangerous experiments. Even though Calvin was warned not to enter his father's quarters in his absence, you know how children tend to be. Calvin did enter his father's quarters and accidentally spilt a beaker's contents. The red gas that came out as a result filled filled the room too quickly. Calvin ended up inhaling quite a bit of that gas, and that gas altered his physiology, giving him the ability to mimic other people's abilities. When Calvin's father figured out what was going on, he took his son and moved him into a cave to cure him. For months, he worked on a machine that would take away Calvin's power and give him a shot at living out a normal life. However, the reality was that the machine would turn Calvin's mimicked powers permanent. Eventually, the people of the town found out what was going on in the cave, and a mob set out to destroy Dr. Rankin and Calvin. To prevent the mob from getting to the machine, Dr. Rankin set off an explosion. However, due to a slight misunderstanding about the powers of the explosives, Dr. Rankin was caught in the blast and died. Calvin survived, and he swore to get revenge on every man who had led to this tragedy. This was how Calvin managed to get his powers. Starting off as a villain, eventually Calvin was reformed, and he became a hero himself. Despite the lack of his X gene, Mimic could easily pass for a mutant, but don't let that confuse you. Puck, most popularly known as a member of the Alpha Fight, Puck is a hero who was an X-Man for a short period of time. Although we know him as the pint-sized hero, Eugene Milton Judd was born in 1914, and he was actually a giant back in the day. Since he was quite young, he swore to live an interesting life. In the quest for an interesting life, Eugene ended up becoming a mercenary of the supernatural kind. This life led him to seek the Black Blade of Baghdad. Once he got his hands on the infamous blade, Eugene learned that this blade was possessed. Black Razor, the being that possessed the blade, attacked Eugene at first, but eventually bonded with him. While the Razor increased Eugene's lifespan and made him stronger than ever, it also made him shorter in size. That, however, did not stop him from living his life as a mercenary, and his stories reached the ears of Wolverine, who knew about Eugene. Puck eventually joined the X-Force, where he was the perfect match for his brethren. His ferocity was well accepted by the X-Force, and Puck shined brightly in the group. Marvelous verdict. With that, we come to the end of our list. While these characters may not have the X gene, they are in no way, shape, or form weaker than any of the mutants who we have seen so far. All of them have gone up against mutants, and several times they have won. This begs the question, would these characters be stronger if they did have mutant abilities? What do you all think? Let us know in the comments. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.